And I touched on the fact that this group is super wealthy, man. They're controlling so much cocaine that's coming out of Colombia, pretty much all of it. It's a billions dollar industry for them. And they have so much cash that they don't, they don't even have a way to use it all, And so what they'll do, what happened with one of the Colombian army groups that was searching for us, they came upon an abandoned FARC camp. And so they're looking around, they're looking for clues, they're trying to find the three of us. And they stumble upon a milk container, like think old school milk jug, those old school milk jugs. They find a milk jug and it's filled with cash, with dollar bills. And they start looking around and they find 30 something of these things filled with cash. So guess what that unit does? They stop looking for us, and they start figuring out how are we going to get out of the jungle with all this is a true story, man. How are we going to get out of the jungle with these millions of dollars in cash they just found? And that's its own separate story on its own. They weighed out the money so everybody got the same exact amount, and they made an agreement to, hey, let's just be quiet about this and not tell anybody we just found all this cash. Screw the gringos. We'll let some other unit deal with them. And of course, dudes start showing up in town wearing nice suits. They've got these women with them, they've got cars all of a sudden. And so, investigation, and they found out they happened upon a huge cache of cash, FARC money, and stopped searching for us. It's absolutely insane, man. I wouldn't have been able to make it up.
So the people that were coming to rescue you and looking for you found some cash and then went and bought some vehicles and had girls on their arms and were found out.
Yeah, they were found out, and they all got arrested. They had to do some jail time. But the thing is, they stopped searching for it. That one unit. That's one unit, right? That one unit stopped searching for us. But nevertheless, that I just bring that up because it's kind of a funny story. But there was still evidence that there were efforts to find us, and so that made me think that my family thought we were alive. And back then, this is early on. We're still 4 or 5 months into this thing. And I'm like, man, maybe in the next 2 or 3 weeks, an agreement will be made, and we'll get home. I was like, I used to think the U.S., there's no way the U.S. will leave Americans behind. They will never leave us behind, So I did have hope, for a few different reasons. First and foremost, because of my faith, right? That alone is one reason I always had hope. But then, thinking as Americans, our government must be involved. They must be trying to get us out. Maybe they're trying to negotiate. I also thought about my company, Northrop Grumman, and thought they, hopefully and more than likely they are trying to do something to get us out. So I had a few things, maybe these were all pipe dream fantasies, but these were things that I was thinking about. Did I have evidence of any of them? The only thing I had evidence of was the air activity overhead, that told me that somebody was looking for us.
Back to it, you're still not talking again for these first year. You're not even talking. You're not allowed to talk. You're kept in a box at nighttime. You're locked in. What stopped you from just saying, man, hey, I give up, man. I can't deal with this. Most people would.
Right.
I've seen people in less situations inside of the prison system give up from way less. They just gave up. Something inside of them just broke. What stopped you from breaking?
For me, it was my family. I had 3 kids, 2 stepsons and my daughter, and I really desperately, badly wanted to see them again. And that when I prayed, that was one of the things. If I could see them one more time, that was it. And that's all I needed, man. I wasn't going to give up. And so, when we're in these camps and we're not allowed to speak to each other, one of the things that I started working on was how to survive that situation. And part of that was figuring out how to deal with these people that are holding us hostage. They're in charge. I really have control of very little, but I did have control of certain things. And so this phase of us not being able to speak to each other, it went on until eventually They took us out of camp one day. It was actually, let me back up. They showed up one day with razor blades and brand new camouflage uniforms, you know, and it's funny because the camouflage uniforms, old school camo, but they said Armada on them, which is Navy. And I looked at the tags, you know, and these were uniforms from the Venezuelan Navy. They had tags on the inside. I was like, dang, brand new uniforms. Somebody shows up with scissors. They give us haircuts and tell us to shave. And so, you know, we're doing what they're saying. And then they blindfold us. They put us in a boat. They move us for a whole day. And you know, they had us shoved into this little tiny area, you know, the three of us all on top of each other, blindfolded, covered with plastic. We're breathing, you know, gasoline fumes because they got the gas tanks right there. And man, I thought we weren't going to make it just through that. But then eventually they take us out of the boat. We're still blindfolded. And I recall, you know, like lifting up my, trying to see whatever I could see and figure out what was going on. And they moved us into a building, with a small room. And the three of us are in a small room. And eventually a guy shows up, an older guy with a camera watching him. And he comes in and he goes, I'm going to interview you guys in English. And he goes, are you Mark? I said, yeah. He goes, I have a message for you from your mother. And I'm like, what? You know, so my mouth drops. And I'm like, I'm waiting to hear it. And he does a 180, turns around and he leaves. No message. So what they set up was what's called a proof of life. They were going to film us alive and send that out as propaganda to prove to our families, to the government, to everybody that they had us and they had us alive. Proof of life. So that was right at the 6-month period. So this, you know, we had not been allowed to speak at all. To all of a sudden they want to interview us, and they've got this fake journalist there, you know, doing this interview. And, you know, again, Keith and I aren't speaking Spanish very well yet. But they had this girl there, and she caught my eye because she did not look like any of the other terrorists. She looked like somebody that had just come out of the city. You know, she's wearing like camo pants, but they're kind of like down her hips. She's wearing like this stringy, tank top type of thing, you know, and her hair looks clean and straight, and she's just watching us. And I'm like, and I remember just noting her and thinking, that's odd. She seems odd here. Then Monohoihoi shows up. The number 2 guy, Monohoihoi, is back, and he comes in and he says, we're going to interview you. And he starts speaking in Spanish, and this girl that I noticed is translating everything in absolutely perfect English. You know, I almost thought she could have spent some time in the U.S., but definitely European. And she's translating everything. And he says, we're going to interview you. We're going to do a proof of life. And he goes, your government's not doing anything for you. And so they move us into another room. They set up a camera, and they start this interview process. And at one point, we take a break. You know, we're not blindfolded anymore, and everybody's relaxed. And I go up to this girl, the English-speaking girl, you know, and for some reason I was drawn to her because of her English, and I felt like we had a connection culturally. You know, she must be from the West. And so I said, hey, you know, what is going on with this? Why are we here? You know, what's going to happen with us? Do you think we're going to live through this? And she pulled out a pack of cigarettes. They smoke these cigarettes called Mustang cigarettes down there. She pulled the pack of Mustang cigarettes out, lit one up. You know, she's not answering me. And she takes a long pull on her cigarette, and she exhales it out, and she starts shaking her head no. And she goes, you know, it depends on what your government does. And I said, what do you mean? And she goes, if they try to rescue you, we're going to kill you. I said, what? You know, again, in shock. I said, what? She goes, didn't you hear what happened last month? And of course, we didn't hear anything. We're literally locked in boxes at night. We don't know anything. And she said, yeah, the government, the Colombian government found a group of hostages, and they tried to rescue them. And she said, our orders are to kill hostages. We won't let you get rescued alive. We'll kill you. And then we dissolve into the jungle. And we just killed a group of 24 last month. And man, I talk about being terrified. That sensation showed up again. I was terrified. I was like, what? You guys literally murdered, all those people? And she said, yes. And I was talking to her alone. And Keith and Tom were in that room. And so I left her and, walked a couple paces, and I said, dudes, they're going to kill us if a rescue comes. And I explained to them what she had just told us. And so they start recording again. And Keith goes, is it true that you're going to kill us? And one of their bosses says, no, if you die, it won't be by our hand. The government wants to, he starts turning it. He says, the government wants to kill you. And he's saying this in Spanish, and she's translating. And Keith's like, well, you just said they're going to kill us. And she said, yeah, that's our order. I think he's explaining it wrong. And the guy says the same thing over. He goes, if you get killed here, it won't be by our hands. And he's like, we're going to protect you. So they were, what they were trying to set up is a manipulation, because what they really wanted with this video is for us to say we didn't want to get rescued. So you know what they did? The journalist says, well, how do you feel about a rescue? Do you want to get a rescue? And all three of us were like, nope. We don't, we were thinking a rescue won't work. They're going to kill us. We're like, no, we don't. We want a diplomatic solution. We don't want to die. We want to get out of here alive. And that was all done on purpose. All of it, not letting us talk to each other, being isolated. All of it led up to this video that they wanted to produce. And the big thing that they wanted from us was for us to say, we don't want a military rescue, that we want a diplomatic solution. And so that's what they got. We easily fell for it. We under duress, everything, confusion, not knowing what was going on, but it was so easy for them to get us to say what they wanted.